Hi there, it's Heather from Kestrel Fields Studio, and today is day 3 of my 15-day live stream challenge, and I welcome you to join me on my journey. Today, I wanted to talk about language. So, did you know I was a language major in college? I actually studied German, and that whole part of my life was so much more German-filled than it is now. But I studied German in high school, had an amazing teacher, and then carried on to decide to major in German in college. So then I studied abroad, and I always loved the study of language and how there's certain words in German that they don't have in English. There's certain words in English that we don't have in German. And also just the culture of language and how, thanks to language, that actually informs how we speak. So, for example, like in German they have that word Schadenfreude, and that's like being happy about other people's sadness, which is a human condition, but we don't have that in English, but now we use that word in English. So I think that's interesting that would we have even thought to be happy about somebody's sad moment if there was not a word for it, right? So if you don't know that there's a word for it, for example, another example is in Vietnamese, they don't have a subjunctive case, and I think that's what it is, subjunctive, and that means that they can't say like, well, if I hadn't said that thing, then this would have happened. Or if I had only done blah, 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 then it would have been different. Like they can't actually, like that's not, as far as I understand in Vietnamese, that's not a sentence structure that they have. So I think it's so interesting how like language informs the way that we think about things. And something I've been noticing in the English language, in the art world, is the word creative. So creative. So if I go to like networking events, and especially if it's not in the art world, then what happens is that I say, oh, I'm Heather, I own Kestrel Fields Studio, an art residency. I sometimes get blank looks, like people don't really understand what an art residency is. And so I spend a lot of time talking about that. But once you get into a conversation with somebody, often I ask, so are you creative in some way? And almost always, I mean, unless I'm in an art specific event, then almost always I get people saying, no, I'm not creative. And I just have been thinking so much lately about why is that people would say I'm not creative. And so I've talked to some friends about this. Hi, Jane, by the way, I know you and I have talked about this. And I really think it's a language thing. I think it's that there's no better way in English to say I'm not artistic, or I don't draw, or I don't paint, or I am terrible at making art. I think that's why people say I'm not creative. But I just don't agree that you're not creative. There's so many ways to be creative. But we don't have a way of talking about it. And often if you say you're creative, then that is like the equivalent of saying I'm artistic or I am an artist. And that right there, that concept of owning that art identity is so scary. I mean, I remember when I was younger in like the early 2000s that I really had to practice saying I am an artist. And it wasn't until after I've been maybe trying to say it and believe it for maybe a decade or so that I could finally say it. Like it wasn't until 2008. So I was, I was in my 30s by then that I could finally say I am an artist. So, and then think about what does that mean if you take the identity of an artist, then what does that mean? Then now, oh my gosh, now you need to make art. Ooh. We talked yesterday about hard things. So sometimes that's a thing too. Like, okay, now if I'm an artist, that means I have to make art. But what if I'm not feeling called to make art? What if I'm not making art that I like? What if I'm not making art that sells? Then how can I even be an artist? So it's such a complex concept, but I still find myself being frustrated when people say that they're not creative, because people are creative all the time, even if they don't draw or do some sort of art media. So yesterday I was thinking about this and sort of, Googling and coming up with what I wanted to say, and I came across this artist, a poet I follow on Instagram. Her name is Whitney Hansen, and I listened to this poem that she read, and one of the lines that she says, because she said, the problem was I started calling myself a poet, and so later in the poem she says, when you label yourself as anything, an artist, a musician, a filmmaker, a dancer, a comedian, a painter, you give the word permission to critique you as such. You become restricted. Now, I would love for you to go and listen to Whitney Hansen's full reading of this poem, because I felt it was really right in line with the frustration I feel about how words tend to box us in. When I really, at Kestrel Fields Studio, I'm trying to think about how can I open up that concept of creativity so that you feel like you should do a residency or a retreat. You should set aside time and space to be creative in the way that you want to be creative. And that's sort of like my goal. I'm trying to get you to legitimize that time and space is really important for yourself. And so when I ask you if you're creative, I want you to think about all the different ways that you might be creative. And I'm so curious to hear about you, about the ways that you engage with your creativity. Sometimes it is thinking creatively about a work project, or sometimes it's about honoring another side of you, or sometimes it's about problem solving, right? Like the more creative we can be in problem solving, maybe you have to do a house thing, or you have to decorate your living room. I mean, there's so many ways of being creative, and that's the part of you that I want to access. So my cousin is a professional astrologer. She is an incredible person, and think what you will about astrology, but what I love about her practice is that she is extremely creative in her approach to astrology. And she and I have been talking about this for years, about what creativity is and where it shows up. And over the course of our conversations, even though she doesn't think of herself as an artist at all, she has started to think of herself as creative. And she came to Kestrel Fields Studio in September and had a retreat for herself, and was shocked at how the space made her want to be more creative, and how creative she would feel when she'd wake up first thing in the morning, and like that was the first thought was, wow, I have a whole day today to just be creative. And so then she was able to delve deep into her astrology practice that was almost like for herself, and to explore new ideas and to entertain other ways of thinking about it, because she was opening up her mind and had given herself the time to be more creative and not just sort of do it the way that she had always done it. So I would encourage you to check her out, Natale Astrology. She is incredible, and I would love for you to experience a reading by her. But today I just wanted to end and say that, ask you, are there ever times when you feel restricted by language? And I wanted to ask you too, what is it like to own that word creative for yourself? So I'll be back tomorrow, 10 o'clock Mountain Time. I hope you'll join me, and I'm so grateful you're here. Looking forward to talking more about the creative life with you. Bye.